Okay, so we've got the snare out here. It's positioned. We've keyframed the factors that influence that. The snare itself, it has an offset and roll and twist animation at 450. The scope does as well. When we get to frame 1, okay, we see the IK for the scope at 0, and the snare still is holding on to that positioning, meaning it's still remembering the values it was set at frame 450. So I'm going to change these back to 0 and 0. So now the snare is back up into the scope where it should be. We're at frame 1. I needed to key those, so 0, set key. All right, now in frame 1, that's set. Now the only problem is the scope here is set an offset of 0 there at frame 1, and I really don't want the scope that far away from the action. In other words, we're going to probably crop this so that the stomach is somewhat in this position. I'll make it a little smaller so it doesn't get behind the outliner there. And as a result, I would like to see the scope pretty quickly come into the frame. So in my perspective window, just to make things maybe a little easier, I'm going to hide the grid for a sec. So with my scope control, if I select just the offset and middle mouse and drag, I should, okay, so right about there, so I'm just off camera there, and I can see it here in the front window. So I'm on frame 1. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe that offset so it will stay at frame 1 there, and then as I play, it should come into the scene. So frame 1 is out of the scene, and then it begins to come into the scene. Now there's a number of, obviously, a lot of adjustments we have to do. The other thing we have to do at frame 0, or frame 1 rather, is make sure that the bend deformer, and it is out of the way, but we'll make those other adjustments. Let's work on getting the snare it's in the right position, but it's not the right shape right now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a -10 frame as my start time. Okay, and I'm going to move the playhead back to -10, and the reason I'm doing this is so I can use that IK for the offset for the scope and change that to 0 and set those, keyframe those. So now when I'm at -10, the scope is not only out of the camera, but more importantly, everything's back on that straight part of the curve, which is going to make my life a lot easier. Now if I hit the W key, you can see the grayed arrow. It's grayed because the snare loop has been skinned to the joints there, and so I can't do anything. I can't move it. But what I'm trying to point out is we were correct earlier in the process when we centered the pivot point. We said modify center pivot point before we skinned the snare loop to the joints in the flexible portion that we made. That we made a new rig, if you remember. It's actually not the same rig that's on the scope. It's a little bit off to the side there. It's that rig. Okay, it's that rig. All right, now my point is that was a real valuable step. And remember, we had that problem in class where it didn't work initially because I didn't remember to do that. So if you get to the point where everything's working and now you're ready to make the shape blend, but your pivot point is somehow not right in the center of the loop, you don't have to start over. What you could do is unskin your loop, reset its pivot point to center, and then rebind it to the joints. Because remember, the animation is on the joints. It's not on the surface at this point. It's not on the curve at this point. So we did it right. So it's all where we should be. So I'm going to duplicate that. And again, it still stays gray because the duplicate is also still bound to the joints there. Instead, I'm going to right mouse and say unlock the selected and move it over, and I'll move only using the X direction so that I don't misread, or I don't want to move in a lot of different places. I want to keep this as clean as possible, and a lot of that's really for me more than the software. Now, because of Professor Foster's good suggestion, we've got to change this shape to be the version that the snare should be when it's inside the scope. And because, like I said, because Craig suggested we use this curve, what I can do is use the scale tool and selectively scale CVs closer together so that they resemble the shape of that snare when it's fully retracted. Okay, so now we've got, this is the retracted version, if you will, and this is the fully open version. So we're going to make a shape blend. So I'm going to go under animation editors, look for shape editor, and under create I'm going to say blend shape deformer, and I'm going to look for that option box here. Under the advanced tab, make sure that pre-deformation is selected. Under basic, I'm going to give it a name. And then I'm going to select the second shape, which I can't do, sorry. So I'll select the target. Sorry. I needed to have these both selected before I went into that box. No, I guess it's just not going to let me select it. There we go. So I want this first and this second, so I can use the outliner here to help me. And again, let's go create, blend shape, make sure the advance is on pre-deformation, loop snare, create. Now theoretically, okay, we've got a shape blend. So I'm going to name these things according to the terms that Maya uses. This curve, this is our duplicate. This is actually the, I'm going to call it the loop target. That's the target. The original curve, that's the loop base. So the base tries to reach the target. So at 0, the target has no influence. The base is not trying to reach that target at all. At 1, the base should be totally resembling or identical, if you will, to the target. Now the last step we want to just see, let's go back to our frame 1. So I can type in 1 here. All right, and put the playhead there. And we want to see where is our loop. Okay, so the loop right now still at 0. So let's go back to frame -10 and let's set the value for the blend shape to 1 and key it. Now when I go to frame 1, stays inside and it's hidden. So I'll key it there again. Now, quite honestly, what I want to do is let's see if I can get the preview window to be the okay. Now I see I'm coming through the perspective window here, and you see the IK handle for the shape blend is already coming out. So I'm going to get to a point where I know at 450 everything's supposed to be where it's supposed to be. In other words, everything is fully, the snare is around the battery and the scope is where it should be. I've got a lot of adjusting to do, but let's say right about here at frame 390. And I can type in, if ever you want to get right to a specific frame, you can always type in a number right there. Let's say there, we go in and look at a couple things. I'm going to keep the loop, the snare. I'm going to set a key so it stays. So it started at -10 at this value, and now it's being told don't change all the way to 390. My IK for the scope, I'm just going to set as it is right now. And the IK for the snare, I want that actually all to be at 0 right now. In other words, I don't want the snare out at all, right? I want to fully retract, and I don't need it to roll yet, so I'll set it all to 0 and key all that. So now you can see that I have this. Everything really basically to this point, all we're seeing then is the scope. We're not seeing the thing come out. Now again, I have to adjust a little bit the blend shape just so I don't go through the wall there, but we're staying with one motion at a time. Now really pretty well. The blend shape's doing a pretty good job to here. Okay. Now immediately, since we set frame 450 originally, all the things, once we get to 390 where everything's 0, the minute 390 is reached, everything starts coming out because it wants to get to the values that were saved at 450, 60 frames later. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, and I want to go right back to frame 390. So I'm going to use this arrow with the orange bar. That means go to the previous keyframe, or step 1 keyframe back. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to middle mouse drag for 20 frames, so about 2/3 of a second. Okay. Now what I did was I changed the position of the playhead, but I didn't change any of the values between 390 and 410. But these aren't set at 410. They're just, I've moved the playhead, but told the software don't begin reaching the values at 450, maintain the values that were at 390. So I'm going to go into those 3 areas again, and I'm going to right mouse and say key selected for my snare. I'm going to say in my shape editor, I'm going to key it there, and the scope should be sitting still, so that doesn't matter. Okay, so the scope, I'm going to just as well just say key selected there. Okay. And we don't have any values changing for the scope. Oh, and the blend shape, it should be okay because we didn't want to change anything there. We actually want that to control itself. All right, so let's see what happens here. Let's say I go to the snare. So I come down, I sit here, and then the things come out. So this little pause, now there's a little bit of a wiggle here. I think I know how to get rid of that. Let's just see if at 390, let's just see if I can find that, the blend value there. I could do this in the outliner, but it's a little easier here for me. All right, so there's my blend handle. What's the value? 34.034. Okay. Now if I move from 390 to 450, notice how that number, that curvature value is changing. So I'm going to go back to 390. Remember, I can type in 390 to make sure I'm where I want it to be. And I'm going to key that. And then I'm going to go, where did we go before? 410 was it? Yep. Then I'll go to the next frame. And that changed on me, right? So let's go back to 390. Oh, I'm sorry, did I lose that? Oh no, here it is. Okay, so at 390 is this value. I did a Command C on a Mac. I don't know if that will work. I think it will. 410. Okay, pasted it, Command V, and key it. Now that should theoretically hold the everything absolutely still for those 2/3 of a second, and then my scope should come out. Or I'm sorry, my snare should come out. Now my looks like my my IK for the scope between 390 and yeah, change a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to 390 and change that to 15. Key it. Go to the next keyframe. Again, make sure it's 715. Key it. And that should make everything sit still. So now the scope doesn't move. There's a little bit of the movement on the bend deformer. We can play with that if we want. Some of that might actually work better. All right, now here's the one thing we do want to change. As we come out, we do want to see that snare beginning to come out. So I'm going to open it up a little bit, key it. By the time I get to 450, I want it to be all the way. So I want to lose, I want to lose the influence of the target, go back to the base shape, which is when it's fully open. Okay, so we come down, stop, give ourselves just a second to be sure we got where we're on, and then come on out. And then from that point forward, now we'll go to the next phase where we remove it. But that's gotten us where our blend shape is working, all the bends, the bend deformer is working for the tip and for the both the snare and the flexible, and then the scope is working. So we have all these all set. Now right here you can see where I'm in a little trouble. My scope is out of the esophagus, so I might have to use my blend shape to just set a little bit better. Key there. I'm on frame 96. You can see the bright white number down there. And I'll just right mouse and key that. So then I should have, now there's more I need to do. I don't think I want to come all the way to here. So maybe at frame 190, maybe 170. I'll move that again and key it. That's kind of a pain to keep keying it every time, right? So one thing you can do, there's a little trigger down here called auto keyframe. If I click that, now when I move, if I want to change the bend shape value again, it will automatically key it. I don't have to say key. So I come down now. back to a spot where I can see it. I'm not sure I want to be quite that. Up, okay. And again, it's just going to key that. So at least now the scope's moving. I still want to work on the timing here, but I'm not poking a hole in the stomach yet. Right here, it seems like I'm starting to bury myself in the stomach a little bit, and that might be a point where I want to use the actually, I think the twist for the scope. Oh, maybe not. Let's use the flex. Yeah, so the flex here will bring me up a little bit. It's not really doing much though. Let's try the snare. Here we go. I kind of come out of there a little bit. Okay. Now that's going to automatically key again because that has been set. So that's where we are right now. Got a good start. We can go play or modify things a little bit. Maybe stop around here. Look around with the scope a little bit for a few frames, maybe 15, 20 frames. Then continue down. Get to the target. Stop. Scope begins to come out and opens up. And now we're at the point where we want to begin our reverse. Okay.